A very warm welcome to one and all present. Today we have gathered for the Global Hints Season 1, Episode 6 roundtable discussion on India and Africa relations, exploring avenues of cooperation and convergence. Global Hints is our online talk series where we discuss issues of international relations, foreign policy, and international affairs. Internationalism is a research organization and a think tank which covers issues related to international law and international relations. A very warm welcome to our speakers for the roundtable discussion and our research members. So, a brief introduction to the theme about India and Africa relations. India shares a rich 3,000-year-old history and a rich 3,000-year-old cultural ties with the continent of Africa. The commercial ties can be dated back to 7th century BC when Dravidians had trade relations with Babylonians. However, a common aspect which connects the continent of Africa and India is both have witnessed the adversaries of colonialism. Both have seen the dark side of colonialism. For years, the colonial rulers had drained and exploited natural resources to bolster industrial revolution back at their home. Certainly, when the situation of global warming and climate change arose, the burden to mitigate climate change shifted from the developed countries to developing countries. Certainly, from the global north to global south. Global south. When we are talking about this global south and south-south cooperation, strategic relations and cooperation between India and Africa is essential. A landmark event for global South-South cooperation can be dated back to 1955, the Bandung Conference. Certainly, the current model of cooperation between India and Africa is responsive to the needs of Africa and is demand-free and free of conditionalities, as stated by Mr. T.S. Tirumurthy back in May 2019. India is dependent on Africa for its oil and LNG requirements. And certainly, India is the fifth largest investor in Africa. Not only at bilateral stage, but certain African countries and India are strategic partners at several multilateral forums as well. For example, India and South Africa share the same stage at G20, BRICS, and the IBSA. Last year, Africa and Indian Ocean region. She is currently the Vice President of Africa Students Association of India, a member of a member of the Africa Committee of the Confederation of Indian Industry, and serves on the executive board of the Forum of Indian Development Cooperation. Ms. Berry has participated in many international conferences and regularly lectures at several institutions in India, such as National Defence College, Foreign Service Institute, Army War College, and the Defense Services Staff College. She is editor of the Africa Trends, a quarterly magazine published by MPIDSA, and is also on the editorial board of Austro-Brazilian Journal of Strategy and International Relations. She has edited several books, including Africa and Energy Security in 2009, India and Africa, Enhancing Mutual Engagement in 2013, India and Africa, Common Security Challenges for the Next Decade in 2016. Next, we have with us Abhishek Mishra. Abhishek Mishra is a junior fellow of Strategic Studies program at Observer Research Foundation, New Delhi, and he is a doctoral candidate at Department of African Studies, University of Delhi. His PhD thesis was on India's maritime cooperation with African countries, and his MPhil dissertation was on India's summit diplomacy with Africa. Abhishek has published several articles on ORF on topics such as African Continental Free Trade Area, 10 Guiding Principles for India-Africa Engagement, and the Maritime Diplomacy. He regularly contributes to the online publication platforms and newspapers such as The Diplomat, The Wire, South Asian Voices, The Hindu, and The Economic Times. Abhishek Mishra and Ms. Berry, we welcome you. Next, we have with us, right from Nigeria, Michael Sunkami. Michael Sunkami is writer, researcher, public speaker, educationist, public affairs analyst with years of experience in development sector in Nigeria. Michael's area of expertise include democracy and governance, human rights, and social justice and development research. Michael bagged his first master's degree from University of Ilorin, Kwara State, Nigeria. In 2018, he was awarded the Most Outstanding Fellow at the Convergence Pan-Africa Youth Democracy Fellowship. In 2019, Michael led a team on UNESCO Youth Civic Engagement Research in Ekiti and Kwara State. He has delivered lectures at different fora and attended workshops locally and internationally and mentors several young people across Africa. Michael, we welcome you. Now I would request the speakers to provide their opening remarks. Ms. Berry, over to you.
Thank you, Vasu, for a very kind introduction and also for giving us the opening point in terms of India's relations with Africa. As you rightly pointed out, India again, and I find that if you listen to what Mr. Modi has been saying, Africa is high priority for India at the moment. And this is visible, not just in the speeches which the leaders, Indian leaders have been saying, but visible in the fact that engagement with the African countries has increased substantially. There has been a substantial number of high-level visits to Africa in recent years. Over 32 high-level visits have taken place in the last 5 years at the level of Prime Minister, President, and Vice President. Secondly, the trade between India and Africa has also increased substantially with the fact that at the turn of the century, India's trade with Africa was pretty low, and now it is something like $69 billion annually. So this shows that India is engaging with African countries quite a lot. But what is important to remember here is that India's relationship with Africa is not a one-way street. What India is looking for is that if we are saying that in Africa is high priority for us, we're also saying that African development priorities are also something which India keeps in mind when it is engaging with Africa. If I'm saying that India's trade with Africa is increasing, but along with it, the idea has a point which Prime Minister Modi mentioned was, and I've also talked briefly, that it's a reciprocal thing that India is high priority and African priorities are Indian priorities in each and every field, in each and every sector. Secondly, I would say that in terms of the commercial engagement has increased in a big way. What is noticeable is that Indian companies have gone over there and they've also invested. It's not just a trade that is happening between India and Africa. There has been substantial number of companies which have gone and invested in Africa, and they are offering terms which are going to help the African countries. So I can give you an example. The fact that the Indians are welcome over there is visible in the point that take the case of small water pumps which are developed by a company called Kirloskar. So in a number of countries, water pumps are known more as Kirloskar rather than water pumps. That shows the kind of interest and affection that is there for India. And also the fact that a large number of people from Africa, young people from Africa, come to India to study also shows this linkage with within science and knowledge. Like what I'm trying to say is a two-way street. One way is that Indians are somewhere where the Africans are not interested in engaging with India. The third pillar that I would like to touch upon here is peace and security, which is quite visible. Right from the very beginning, India has supported peace and stability in Africa. And this is quite evident the fact that India had participated in the first UN peacekeeping mission in Africa, which was in Congo. And subsequently, India has been part of all the UN peacekeeping missions in Africa, almost all of them, in supporting the African and the African Union's desires for peace and security. And similarly, for the African countries, maritime space, the maritime zone has become an area of deep interest, given the fact that there are rising maritime challenges for Africa, and also the fact that about 38 countries out of 50 in Africa are either coastal or island nations. So maritime security is very important for the African countries as a whole. And similarly for us, India is very much a maritime nation. About 90% of our trade also is through maritime routes. And India and Africa are connected through the Indian Ocean, or what is now known as the Indo-Pacific. So this Indo-Pacific connect links India and Africa. The fact that we both share similar maritime challenges brings us closer. So whether it is countering piracy or maritime terrorism, these are issues which are bringing India and Africa together in the security sphere too. The rise of terrorism in several parts of Africa, whether it is Nigeria, where our fellow panelists belongs to, or whether it's the Sahel, Mali, and other countries in the Sahelian region in West Africa, or North Africa, Libya, Egypt, or in Somalia, Kenya, in East Africa, and recently Mozambique has also seen some terror activities. This rising terrorism is also something which is a concern, which is common for India and Africa. India has also witnessed a huge amount of terror. Sorry, so it understands and shares these concerns with the African countries. Three points which I wanted to make. And finally, I would like to say that while India is engaging with Africa, Africa is not a monolith. There are 54 countries and 5 regions. So India has relationships with each country bilaterally and also as a pan-Africa level. In the fact that African countries themselves are moving towards regional integration with launching initiatives like the African Free Trade Area, African Continental Free Trade Area, which was supposed to be launched in July, but now it's been postponed to the next year because of COVID. I think all these factors make India-Africa cooperation to be vibrant and important. But India is not alone. There are several other countries which are also engaging with Africa, whether it is the US, which held a summit a few years back, the India-Africa Summit, or it is the UK, is also here engaging in Africa and held the first ever UK Africa Summit early this year. And then there are countries like Russia also engaging Africa in a big way. They also hosted a Russia Africa.
But despite saying that, it is very important for us to break some very stereotypical notions which lie about Africa. Firstly, as Ruchita ma'am pointed out, Africa is not a monolith. It is a continent of 54 independent countries. It has a population of 1.2 billion. and a 2.5 trillion GDP. It has around 1250 to 1300 regional languages as well. Now, in recent years, achieved greater political stability with very many elections being conducted. These are all bound to deliver greater socio-economic dividends. They have achieved greater economic integration as a free trade area, which will create a single unified and continent-wide market for the full services, etc. They have also made very good progress when it comes to indicators such as governance indicators as well. The middle class is rapidly exploding, it's increasing. It's a youthful and it's a blessed continent. In fact, African continent has 50%, half of the world's gold reserves. It has 90% of cobalt and platinum. Four countries in Africa, they produce one-fifth of the world's chromium. They have 60% arable land. They have 5 out of 30 top oil-producing nations reside in Africa, and they are also the topmost six most out of 6 out of the 10 topmost fastest-growing economies in the world. But of course, saying all of these, COVID-19 has presented enormous challenges. It has certainly halted the growth story in the short term, both for Africa and we can of course build back better. And the growth story still looks promising in the medium to long term. Now, India also, as we know, is a very fast-growing emerging economy. But our people and our leaders have showed a kind of a vision to basically to script or write a new development chapter in our development trajectory. So, despite these robust engagement for over 70 years, what we saw is that the Indian government never had any clear sort of a strategy when it comes to relationship with Africa. This fortunately got rectified in the year 2018 when Prime Minister Narendra Modi, during his address at the Ugandan Parliament, espoused the 10 guiding principles. Now, to be sure, these 10 guiding principles for India-Africa engagement, these are not exactly new. Many aspects of it, they reflect continuity, because these guiding principles, what they do is they reflect a change in the nuances and priorities of engagement and investment. Investments, as you know, Indian income is around 50 billion. Trade is correct, 50 billion, 20 billion. Invest one-way street countries as well, especially South African companies, Tanzanian companies have invested in Swiggy, Flipkart, Baidu, and all. I think they have around 3 to 4 billion for investment. Other companies like Old Mutual, Sunlam, and all are also in Roma, gas oil field in Mozambique. They have acquired new coal fields, offshore stake in Namibia, 18% of crude oil, which India is Africa. And 11% out of this 18% alone comes from one country, that is Nigeria, that imports its crude oil. We are trying to also get liquefied natural gas, LNG, from Mozambique. India procures countries. 90% also phosphate come from African countries. India's entire fertilizer industry is based on what we solely import from countries like Tunisia, Morocco, and Senegal, I think, as well. Raw cashews, 90% of Tanzanite. So diamonds as well. So the relationship is very diverse and all, as you can see. To engage and all, we have been CII and Exim Bank. They have been holding many regional conclaves. So we recognize that Africa is not a monolith. That's why every region, every country has their own priorities. That's why we have started all these regional economic conclaves. The West Africa and India conclave took place, I think, in 2017 in Nigeria, Uganda, Southern Africa, and Comesa region. That one took place in Zambia, and the West Asia and the North Africa summit took place in Egypt. And currently, the next 15th annual CII Exim Bank conclave will also be taking place this 3 days time, from 22nd to 24th September. Now, in terms of what future areas of collaboration is there. Firstly, of course, there is a issue of health. Now, during COVID and all, we saw how we undertook Mission Sagar and all. We provided paracetamol and hydroxychloroquine and other forms of essential medicine to almost 32 countries, not also on a commercial basis as well. we have also come up with new innovative courses like EITech COVID management courses, which through which many countries have been able to prosper through that. We have also there are many. Back in 2016, they signed an MOU with African Union Scientific and Technical Cooperation to collaborate more on training, conducting all these training courses and now with COVID and all, now we have again I mean the demand from African side is that include all these COVID and all courses as well, apart from other courses which are already taking place. So we can see that these nature, I mean, our relationship is very peace and security as well, as Ruchita ma'am pointed out, it is intrinsically linked with development. Uh, we have like issues like terrorism, counterterrorism, transnational crime, or even climate change, the role of women in peacekeeping, and promoting a culture of basically peace and all. These are all the areas which align with Africa's Agenda 2063 along with India's agenda. Now, in terms of security, basically two shared beliefs drives our India-Africa security partnership. First is we both strongly acknowledge that peace and security, as I said, is intrinsically linked to development. Without one, the other cannot be achieved. And the second point is that terrorism also is the biggest threat to humanity. We don't distinguish between what's a good terrorist or what's a bad terrorist. Uh, we are providing training under United Nations peacekeeping forces, around 5,000 to 6,000 Indian soldiers serve wearing blue helmets in the region. We support African Standby Force, the operationalization of African Standby Force. We support. Then in 2016 in Liberia, the first female com police unit were deployed by India. We are both again comprehensive international terrorism by United Nations. Germany. We have defense partnerships with countries like Nigeria, Zambia, Ghana, Botswana, Namibia, Uganda, Mozambique, and we have also assisted in setting up a military academy in Ethiopia. We have set up a defense and naval war college in military war game center in Uganda, and also a Air Force center in Ghana. Peace and security, the year last year was extremely important of India collaboration because two new major initiatives we rolled out. First was the Africa India training exercises, which basically was participated by 17 African countries. And then we also had the India Africa Defense Ministers Conclave, out of which the Lucknow Declaration was born this year. That was conducted in February 2020 this year, in which defense ministers and chiefs from 14 African countries attended, and 38 countries overall they participated. So these kind of platforms and all, they basically provide a very regular platform to conduct sustained discussions on peace and security idea. In terms of what we can export to African countries, we are exporting them offshore patrol vessels. Recently to Mozambique, we have done previously to Seychelles as well as Mauritius as well. We are exporting fast interceptor boats, FIBs, Dornier 228 aircrafts, arms and ammunition, unmanned aerial vehicles, sport utility vehicles, and as well as light combat aircraft as well, Dhanush artillery gun systems, and also combat helicopters as well. But saying all of these is easy. In order for true kind of defense and security partnership to emerge, India has to explore shifting its manufacturing base to select African countries and jointly produce defense and military hardware. So once we shift our bases and jointly produce, then only it will be the most reliable kind of partnership. This will basically not only provide employment to local Africans, but it will also enhance Indian defense firms' visibility, create a kind of a brand India in African markets. Apart from like regular interactions which you already do with initiatives like Aero India or Def Expo, etc. Other emerging area of cooperation, solar energy as well. It's a vital area which is coming up. We have around 2 billion lines of credit set aside for the implementation of off-grid solar energy projects, bridging our digital divide basically through the EVAB network, E-Vidya Bharati and E-Arogya Bharati network, which is basically an extension of the earlier Pan-Africa E-Network project, which was very successful and which operated in 48 African countries. It was operating out of Dakar, Senegal. It connected through fiber optics African telemedicine and telemedication institutions along to their with their Indian counterparts, so that they can provide like training and guidance and all in order to conduct courses. So bridging the digital divide is an important theme which we are doing. We can also as well is one area which we can explore, because this is an area where India has received an interest from, especially from two countries. One is Mauritius and the other is Uganda. So Africa should try, traditional. I mean, they have a vast immense of knowledge when it comes to infectious diseases, and also this won't be just a one-way process. This will be, I mean, give and take process. India can learn so much about how Africans so successfully defeated Ebola and all. What is their experience in dealing with infectious disease? Whereas same way we can also like teach them about what are the benefits of yoga and alternatives to like basic allopathic medicines and all. Blue economy also another very important initiative. Blue economy. There's a lot. I mean, many countries like South Africa, Mauritius, as well as Seychelles. These have been the champions of blue economy. South Africa's Operation Fakino unique debt for adoption scheme is there. Blue bonds. These are all very unique ideas. India itself is considering setting up a separate ministry of blue economy and all, which will coalesce and put deal for sanitation, etc., and all kind of other. But for any kind of blue economy, must remember that local participants involved in the community, because without look at some of the projects with China as very Krivi project or other projects in Kenya and all. I mean, if you don't involve the local community, it's bound to fail. So involving the local community is very important. Trilateral cooperation also very unique things that are coming up. Although it's not always easy to execute trilateral cooperation projects, but we're exploring 2+1 projects. We have already, I think, with France, of course, International Solar Alliance, as you guys know, it's a very, very good and unique initiative. Then there is, I think, then there is with United Arab Emirates, UAE, we are setting up an IT services unit in Ethiopia, if I'm not mistaken. Then with Japan also, we are working on a cancer hospital in Kenya. So trilateral cooperation is also picking up. Women empowerment is also very important. So yes, so overall, like the time, I mean the time is best. Agriculture as well, like we're promoting agribusiness by launching many incubation centers and all. Uh, I think we have recently set up 7 vocational training centers or incubation centers in 7 different African countries. We have set up 5 food processing business incubation centers in countries like Angola, Ghana, Uganda, Cameroon, and Mali. We are setting up food testing laboratories. Soil health card scheme, which was launched by Prime Minister Narendra Modi back in 2015, is also very important initiative. We're also trying to take our contract farming approach to the country. So as you can see, the entire gamut of cooperation is very vast. Of course, there are certain, like every relations, there are certain lacunas which we need to work on. But still, especially from 2014, our ties have been like picking up very well. As Ruchita ma'am said, Africa is now India's topmost priority. But what we should do is, rather than just focusing on G2G interactions, the time has come to focus more on enhancing B2B and private, involve the private sector more. They should drive our investment and trade and investment relationship. That is of course easier said than done. Lines of credit, as we know, it's very important. Around 12 billion lines of credit to 41 different African countries we have. But lines of credit has, I think, in my personal opinion, it has run its course, because we have to now look more at towards FDI and PPP projects and involvement of private sector. So just to basically conclude, I will say that like in any future world order, India and India, which represents 1/3 of humanity, Africa, which has almost a quarter of the United Nations member states, India and Africa, we will play a very central role due to our remarkable achievements which we have made. So yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks. And laying these topics as foundation for our roundtable discussion. Next, I would like to invite Michael. Michael, over to you, and we are really looking forward to your remarks. Michael, over to you.
Hey, good afternoon from Nigeria, and it's nice engaging this platform once again. Thank you for the invitation. There is no better time than now to further discuss about the relationship between Africa and India. We know from time immemorial, India has been a very good partner, a very good friend to Africa, and we appreciate the level of brotherhood that we have maintained over the years. This is quite significant. It's very germane, and of course, the entire African community. We are so blessed to have India as a brother. Actually, we know the role, or rather, the synergy that have thus existed between India and Africa. And of course, I would love to reference the founding father of modern India, that's the person of Mahatma Gandhi. History made us understand that he started his political career in Africa, particularly in the south part of Africa, transversing to through Eastern Africa. And when Africa are the in years past, most especially as it have to do with India, we made to understand that there's a very robust relationship between the eastern part of Africa and India. That was in about decades ago. That's tens of decades ago. And what is very important is that when we look at the eastern part of Africa, the likes of Ethiopia and Eritrea and Somaliland, there is a quite cultural synergy between the countries I've mentioned and India. So it tells us that even culturally, we are affiliated, we are connected. So, but in recent time, that is over when globalization began. Let me use the term. We discovered that India has been a very good partner to not just to the East African country alone. India has been a very good partner to other countries, other blocks. When I talk of blocks now, I'm talking of the West Africa, the Southern Africa, and the Central Africa. India has been a very good partner. So we relationship existing between Africa and India. And of course, in the Asian continent, we know the significant role that India as a state is playing. So it is quite important that we emphasize or we discuss on those things, on those areas that India has been a very good friend to us. When we talk in terms of medical tourism, India has been a very good country for let me say African leaders to actually patronize when it comes to medical tourism. And in terms of defense, we know India has been a very good country when it comes to high defense formation and intelligence sharing in the global environment. But funny enough, the defense industry in India and in Nigeria in particular, where I am from, I'm from Nigeria. The defense industry started almost the same time. But it is important to actually praise India for how far you guys have gone in terms of fortifying or coming up with a very strong defense industry. So Africa as a continent, we have so much enjoyed support from your defense sector. You have signed, there's a whole lot of synergy partnership between the defense industry of India and that of most African states, or let me say some African states. I'm so sure that Nigeria and India will have a very good working relationship, and Nigeria has benefited immensely from from the Indian defense industry. Then when we look at the trade agreement, we have equally read that India and Africa, we have a trade partnership worth over 62.6 billion US dollar between 2017 and 2018. This tells us much that, of course, in terms of trading, Africa and India, we are very we are good as well. Almost all states in Africa, we have the presence of Indians. Let me take for Nigeria, for example. There's practically no state. Nigeria, for example, is made up of 36 states. There's practically no state you visit in Nigeria today that you will not see Indian working or trading or doing one. Of course, I've said that earlier. We're in terms of traditional medicine, medical tourism, and of course, other health benefits or rather health commodities, health supplies. Africa has so much enjoyed a very good relationship with India. And when we talk of agriculture as well, we know that India is doing, wonderfully well when it comes to agriculture. However, Africa also is doing very wonderfully well in terms of agriculture because for an average African is a farmer. So we are doing well in terms of agriculture. We are doing well, and of course, we have so much enjoyed partnership, a very good partnership as well with India. Then when we look at the science and tech industry, particularly the technology industry, of course, we know that India is doing very well, and that has actually improved the Indian economy. So Africa as well is coming up, is improving our tech industry. Young people are injecting self, of course, that is what determines the 21st century global economy. So, Africa is doing well in that area. And of course, we know India has been a very good partner in the tech industry as well. However, we still continue to leverage partnership to improve all these are consolidated. I mean, this relationship is further consolidated. It of course it helps Nigeria or rather Africa to do better in a tech industry, and importantly as well, it creates common brotherhood between the two the Indian I mean India rather and Africa. Then in terms of should I say, multilateral engagement between India and Africa. In 2015, at the launch of the Indian African Forum Summit, that's IFAS, that's what it is called. This forum is a way of actually consolidating the multilateral relationship that does exist between Africa and India. So we can continue to talk on and on and on. So in the we just have to look at what the importance of Africa the relationship of Africa to India. Let me just say as well that India is seeking diversification of its oil supplies away from Middle East, and Africa can play a very important role. So in the oil and gas industry as well, we know that India, in fact, has been a very good partner with to Africa as well. You know, Africa we are blessed with oil. Most countries in Africa we are all are oil producing countries. So India has been a very good partner. Let's take for example a refinery in Nigeria. We take part of our crude oil to we bring them down to India for refining. So this is well dated. We can talk on and on the relationship that is in between that exists between and India and Africa. So on this note, I would love to stop there while we look forward to other discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael, for all the contours which you have highlighted and mentioned. especially the Indian African Summit. We are yet to have, which is supposed to forward to that summit. So after the opening remarks, we can see that maritime diplomacy, defense cooperation, science and technology. These are major avenues of cooperation. Now, speakers, especially starting with Ruchita ma'am, to highlight the importance of maritime diplomacy. Because, ma'am, according to me, when we see Eastern African countries are our partners in Indian Ocean, Eastern African countries are our partners in Indian Ocean Rim Arc Association. And also, though India has got the observer status in code of conduct. So, if you could further comment on the importance of this maritime diplomacy between India and Africa, and hence we could now lay floor. We could now say that floor for the discussion is open. Ruchita ma'am, over to you.
Thank you, speakers, and I welcome the remark made also our friend from Nigeria. I've talking about maritime diplomacy, which is an important aspect of our engagement with Africa, as Indian Ocean is um, an ocean which is common to both India and Africa. A large number of African countries are the total all island based. So India can cooperate a lot in the maritime sphere. And looking at that and recognizing that maritime sphere is very important for both India and Africa, Prime Minister Modi at 15, when he launched India's policy for Sagar, that is security and growth for all, where he focused mainly on the Indian Ocean region, saying that both India and the African countries have similar problems in the maritime area. Uh, Piracy, as it was witnessed between 2008 and 2014, was very much evident in the Indian Ocean region. And the pirates had begun from Somalia, of Somalia, but their spread was almost till the Arabian Sea. They came very close to Arabian Sea, close to Lakshadweep Islands, countries face. While African countries are coastal countries, very few of them have developed navies or the capacity to deal with emerging threats in the maritime sphere. So it was not just countries like Somalia, where they have been fighting a civil war for a very long time, but other countries in the region also are looking for partners in enhancing their maritime security capacities. Whether it is Kenya, whether it is Tanzania, whether it is Mozambique, uh, so Seychelles or Mauritius. Some of these countries have very strong maritime cooperation with India. Countries like Mauritius have a very long and historical cooperation in the maritime sphere with India. But the others, like Madagascar, Comoros, and others are countries where with them in cooperating, dealing with the maritime security threat. But secondly, the the African countries have realized that the maritime sphere is very only for Africa because the result of blue is very important. And therefore, even before India started thinking about blue economy, the African countries took steps to enhance and come up with the maritime economy. Mentioned in the integrated maritime document, which the African Union released, I think, sometime in 2015. So India can cooperate with Africa Also in the blue economy sphere with countries such as Kenya or or others like Mauritius, Madagascar, Tanzania, South Africa, Mozambique, all in the Indian Ocean. But it's not limited to the Indian Ocean. India is also looking at cooperating with countries in West Africa. Nigeria is a very important partner for India, and it is the largest trading partner of India at the moment. And we realize that Nigeria also has a lot of threats from the maritime zone. Currently, the piracy has moved from Indian Ocean to the Gulf of Guinea region. So, so India would like to support the West African countries. Should get involved in supporting the West African countries in their fight against the maritime threats. They have come together in dealing to the Duande Code. If there is a Djibouti, which is the blood for the West African countries. Suraj, you mentioned that India is part of the IORA. Yeah, India, South Africa, Australia were the founding countries, and uh, countries like Mauritius, which was one of the founding countries of the IORA. And maritime security is something which concerns all the Indian Ocean countries, and therefore. I agree with you that post-COVID health sector is something very important and it should get priority in terms of cooperation between India and Africa. While in terms of B2B cooperation, this is nothing new. We have been cooperating with Africa at the business level for a very long time. And India's engagement with Africa was never at the G2G level. The B2B level also began in the 60s and 70s. But I would say that it took off in a big way at the turn of the century and with major chambers of commerce launching these business conclaves, whether it is Confederation of Indian Industry or FICCI and PAC chamber, they all have come up with several initiatives in terms of linking with Africa and linking with African businesses and coming to a joint platform and discuss ways and means of enhancing the collaboration. So, in terms of joint investments and increasing their trade further. Medical becomes an important area. Initially, it was only in terms of either trade of pharmaceuticals, which I think India is one of the powerhouse, pharma powerhouses in a big pharma exporter, and it has been exporting a lot of pharmaceuticals, not just in Africa but across the world. And so India and the African pharmaceutical industry could come together in search for innovative ideas in collaborating with each other. And the other area could be in terms of joint research in the medical field. Training of medical personnel is again something which could be another idea. Already, I think there have been some, even in the COVID period, under the ITech program, there has been, some training going on in the medical field between India and Africa. I hope I have answered some of your questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Michael, would you like to further highlight on this?
Yeah, thank you. So as the discussion is on, there's practically no way we won't continue to talk about the partnership between India and Africa, most especially in the earth industry. We know the pre-COVID era, before the global environment is ravaged by the global pandemic. We of course know the role that the Indian medical institutions are playing, most especially in provision of pharmaceutical commodities to Africa. So it tells us that, of course, this relationship needs to be sustained. But beyond the importation of some of these Indian commodity, or rather Indian pharmaceuticals, into Africa, I think there's need for India to actually have established pharmaceutical institutions. However, there may be one, there may be two. India is playing a very significant role in the medical industry. But importantly, it is equally, I need to state this all, in Africans also well when it goes. So we have some of all these medical ingredients in Africa. So the relationship will be further consolidated when we have the heavy presence of India and Africa, I mean, in Africa, so that we can further collaborate as brothers to improve the medical industry globally. Thank you.
A lot of things were highlighted in the opening remarks itself. So, a lot of things were highlighted in the opening remarks itself. And now we have even discussed about maritime diplomacy. I would like to take the discussion forward towards how, apart from India, foreign interventions, or let's just say involvement of foreign countries in Africa other than India are different. And how, let's suppose, for example, say Chinese involvement through BRI, how does it impact India's engagement in Africa, and what's the difference? Not only China, when we see India from that of US, Japan, or even from European partners. So I would request speakers to carry about about interventions or involvement of foreign countries.
The relationship between India and Africa, I need to emphatically state that it has been very profitable to the two partners in comparison with China. For example, we know that our rail industry, our transport industry in the past was actually managed by India. That was before shortly after the independence, our transport industry, our rail line was well managed by Indians, and this was to the profit. But recently, when we look at the relationship between Africa and China, we discover that, of course, despite the fact that Africa needs development, some of the conditions that in China has always been bringing to table is not always profitable. But we have no option, because there is a saying in African parlance that he who pays the piper dictates the tone. For example, you have the presence of the Chinese in almost all countries in Africa, all states in Africa. But if China is to borrow you money, they will still be the one to tell you the conditions attached to the money. Well, that is good thing in the borrowing and lending. Let me say, in the global environment, when it has to do with finance, and at the same time, they will still be the one to provide the workforce. So these are some of the stringent conditions that China do bring to the table, which we can say categorically that it has not been good for Africa as a continent. So we are now like, okay, should we have other partners? Can India be occupy the position that China is playing in Africa? Because we know the historical relationship between Africa and China. And of course, I want to believe that there will be high level of consideration when it comes to balance of trade between Africa and India. So some of these agreements, the multilateral agreements, the bilateral relationship, the diplomatic relationship, can be further looked into in such a manner that it will be profitable to Africa, and at the same time it will be profitable to India. And of course, with Africa is unfortunately is still grant receiving, aid receiving continent, which ordinarily is not supposed to be. So we cannot actually remove some things from, should I say, some elements from our political leaders. But however, the citizens continue to make demand on some of these issues that are not, that are not better or that are not profitable to us. So we just want to make the position known that if Africa as a continent and India can come to table and discuss about some issues in Africa, perhaps what we have to offer will be better off than what some other countries will have to offer. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. Ruchita ma'am, after you.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Rafi. I think it's very important that we are discussing the other regional powers too, because China, as you rightly mentioned, is engaging with Africa in a big way. But let me say that what has been the mainstay of India engagement, and then compare it slightly with China.
Ma'am, actually, your
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Yeah.
we can hear you now. We can hear you.
Yeah. So India's engagement has always stressed the fact that engagement with Africa is driven by the African needs and African priorities and African demands. So India has focused on uh, a model of development partnership which would not lead to empowering the youth in Africa by opening up various training institutions in several African countries where it has been engaged with. But unfortunately, the Chinese engagement, as it is with the African countries, you know, has led to enhancement of the debt in some of these African countries. I can just give you an example of Kenya, where China was involved in setting up the railway, the SGR, the railway track between Mombasa and Nairobi. Now, unfortunately, last year it came out that this whole project, where China had loaned about $5 billion to Kenya, has a clause which was not known earlier, where if Kenya defaults in repaying the loan, then Mombasa port, which is a very important port, which is, I think, a strategic port which links the entire East African region, would go in the hands of China. We've seen this kind of policy in our neighborhood in South Asia, with the Hamban Tota port going in the Chinese hands because the Sri Lankan government was not able to repay the loan. So India has focused on a policy which would strengthen the African economy, um, and while the Chinese policy somehow has led to creation of greater debt among the African countries. So that is the major difference at the moment at the policy level, I think. But the Chinese engagement is not just in the economic sphere. The Chinese engagement is also in peace and security. The Chinese are very much involved in. India has been involved in UN peacekeeping activities in Africa. China is also there at the moment in various of the UN peacekeeping. It has opened a base, a first overseas base in Djibouti. It is also involved in various activities in terms of either selling arms and equipment to the African countries, or training them, or involved in multilateral exercises with some of the African bilateral and multilateral exercises with the African countries. It also launched the first ever forum for peace and security with the African countries a couple of years back. Not just in the economic sphere, it also goes beyond the China's engagement with Africa. So BRI I would say that BRI is something new for Africa. China's involvement infrastructure, what is known as the stadium economy, spirit, building across Africa and initially to the opportunity in Africa play more whether the maintenance of them was possible for the African countries or not, threats from Africa would share. So I think while China's engagement in Africa is good to some extent, there have been also certain aspects of their engagement which may not have been so popular among the civil society in Africa. So it is up to the African countries how do they engage with their external partners, whether it is India or China or any other country. They need to set the terms of their engagement, whether the investments that are happening or whether the development cooperation that's happening is really helping the African countries or it is just a one-way flow. I'll stop here. Martin.
Thank you, ma'am, for highlighting all the topics. Abhishek, would you like to further add on this?
Yeah, thank you. See, the thing is, I think every country is like engaging with African countries now in a very like dynamic and fast-changing world. Okay, many non-Western countries, we all want to be a part of Africa's growth story, and vice versa. Like countries like India, China is of course there, here, Turkey, UAE, and increasingly Russia. We are all engaging with Africa. India is only one of these countries which has been engaged. Now, when it comes to what India and China, what similarities are there, what differences are there. First and foremost, India completely recognizes that our engage. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Yeah. So India completely recognizes that our engagement with African countries is completely standalone. Okay, it is not in any way sort of way influenced by what China is doing, what France or what any other countries are doing. But it always basically, like what we both are trying to do along with other countries as well is we are all trying to carve a like space and position ourselves as reliable partners for African countries. Now we are all trying to burnish our credentials as like as humanitarian champions and all. This basically has become the name of the game. When it comes to differences in India's and Chinese approach in Africa, Chinese approach, as you can see, has mostly been more traditional in nature, which is they mostly focus on like hard infrastructure development projects, resource extraction, or even elite level wealth creation. Just look at the kind of between CCP, Chinese Communist Party, and many from Democratic Republic of Congo, many other African countries, the ties which they have undertaken in the political level and all between these parties. So these such emphasis on like hard on aid through FDI on infrastructure projects and all these might seem very lucrative in the short run to many, not just African countries but to other small developing economies as well. These all might seem very lucrative on the surface, but because like all these developing countries are looking always on the lookout for quick and easy money. But the main question is, are these projects and all, are these issues, are these sustainable in the long term, in the long run? Now, in terms of, we always seem to come up with all these debt trap diplomacy and all, but on the contrary, there is actually no evidence, at least till now, of any assets being seized by Chinese entity when they have not been able to pay their debt. So while it is certainly very important to engage in like debates on African debts, or that is basically which are not driven by sort of a China phobia or something like that. It is at the same time we can't deny the fact that like the opaque nature of most Chinese contracts, which are mostly like they are not visible to all. So opacity difficult for countries to conduct things like. While India focuses on its core competencies, which is basically IT, capacity building, skills development, etc., for China, three things are important when it comes to not just its engagement in Africa, but it's basically other global engagement as well. They care about firstly money, they care about political influence, and they care about elite level wealth creation. They care about strong state to state relations overshadowing people to people ties, which is happily reflected in the recent, xenophobic attacks on Guangzhou city, which basically turned out to be a full-blown political. Not before that. China has not seized any assets. They have, of course, made a military base in Djibouti, which is a big deal. But at the same time, just look at it. There are six or seven other countries as well who has a military base in Djibouti. France, US, Japan. India will get access to Djibouti through its agreement with Japan and all. So even we are getting access to bases in Djibouti and all. We are also planning something with in Puntland region and all, with Somaliland and all. There are many things on the pipe. So when it comes to China and India, what we do and all. There are certain things that China does well. Of course, we can't match their economic heft. We don't want to match their economic heft as well. We are very much content on what we are doing. There are, as I mentioned earlier, there are certain lacunas that we need to overcome. Uh, Primarily, the issue of like a visa requirement, the Africans who come to India to stay and all, like overstaying Africans. That's a big problem. Indian government has been working on it. The idea is, like because all Ministry of Home Affairs, Ministry of Law and Justice, all of these separate ministries, even under MEA also there are separate divisions who look after all these visa issues and all. So part of the reason is that why all these visa thing has been made complex is that so that they act as a deterrent, so that people basically respect the visa rules and they don't overstay. So all these processes, these are few lacunas. Racism incident is also, as you know, it's a problem not just in China. As we see, it's a very big much of a problem, unfortunately, in India as well. We need to overcome. We need to have a zero tolerance policy towards all those incidents which occur, unfortunately. So what China does, they have economic heft to match. They are investing FDI heavily. We can't match those. We don't want to match those. But idea is for Indian projects, whatever projects we undertake, the idea is to unlock the productive capacities of Africans. That is the core dimension of India's project, India's development partnership with Africa, as opposed to what China does. But we need to do a lot. We need to buckle up. Trade 70 billion, investment 54 billion. There's a lot more potential. So yeah, it's only going to get better from now on. I'll stop it.
Thank you, Abhishek. So, all the three speakers have highlighted very essentially about the differences between India and China's involvement, what can be the way forward, and what is the African perspective to it. I would now request Prateek and Satyajit to provide their comments or any questions which they would like to put forth, and also mention the speaker which they would like to direct. Thank you. Prateek and
Yes,
Satyajit. Yeah, we can hear you.
actually the it relates to Indian foreign policy, and the question is open to anyone can answer it for me. My question is that do you think that increased Indian investment in Africa will be the next step for the Indian foreign policy? Because if you look at what our neighbor China is doing in Africa right now, the amount of investments they're making. So do you think that next step forward for Indian foreign policy, like for our government, is to invest in all the countries of Africa? So if anyone can answer that, really helpful.
Yeah, let me quickly react to that as well. there is I need to make this position known now that there is this uproar in Africa at the moment as to if Africa should continue to depend on foreign aid, foreign help in, I mean, for our development. This has been the demand of the citizens in Africa in recent time. Because when we look at it historically, or rather, it's no news that Africa is blessed with enormous natural resources, but due to bad leadership, most especially the ones who succeeded the founding fathers of Africa, we've been unable, or rather, they've been unable to harness these resources to improve development in Africa, to actually foster development in Africa. And I am making this position known for us to actually have the understanding that Africa at this point is not is not only dependent on foreign help. We now want to begin to look inward, look internally. I mean, we want to stop becoming a grant receiving nation. We want to stop being a grant recipient. We want to stop being aid recipient. No, however, I'm not disputing the support we are getting from external sources, but I'm trying to make us understand as well that there's this agitation from all of us now that no, Africa is too blessed to continue to depend on America. Africa is too blessed to continue to depend on China, on India, on Russia to help our turn around economic fortunes despite the enormous resources we have. So what I think we need to do, if I'm to relate your question as an African that is passionate about our development, about our growth. So what I think we need from external body like India is to give certain conditions to African leaders as to what they can benefit if they can actually judiciously use the resources. For example, permit me to speak as an activist now. Some of them, they come to India for medical tourism after they have siphoned the Commonwealth in Africa, after they have mismanaged our Commonwealth, they rush to India for health tourism. So what stops them? The money they are stolen to fix the health infrastructure. So one of the things I think India can help us do at this particular time is to deny them access, though we know it may be difficult anyway because of the diplomatic bilateral and multilateral relationship between Africa and India. But it will be good for the sake of we citizens that you deny some of these people access to your facilities so that all they can know that oh they are not doing and can use the resources scarce resources, scarce but available resources to turn around our economic and our economic fortunes as Africans. So this is the angle to which I am seeing the question being asked by Patrick. It is not just enough for other countries to be throwing money at Africa. Even reports has shown that most of the money coming to Africa as aid is being siphoned through the budgetary process. So we just wish that some of these should stop. However, we still continue to look for support, most especially between the short and medium term. But the long term is just that Africa wants to stop being a recipient nation. So we can automatic. So by the time Africa has succeeded in building Indians to come around to evaluate our aid facility. When we build a sound transport system, we can invite India to come around to help us evaluate and perhaps make suggestions where necessary for us to improve. Likewise, our tech industry. So that is the area of partnership that I want India to help us. However, I know the onus is on the responsibility on us to actually take the lead. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am, after you.
Yes, thank you. I Michael, I think you make some very important points. If you're talking about Africa looking inward and thinking of becoming more self-dependent, I think it's the same in this COVID era. The countries across the world are thinking of becoming self-dependent. In India, the cry which our Prime Minister is talking about is Atmanirbhar Bharat, which means self-dependent India. So even within India also, there has been a lot of talk about becoming self-dependent in all each and every area, that we should reduce our dependence on our external partners. So this is something which both Nigeria and India have in common with this. And a number of other countries also in this COVID era. The fact that because of the conditions, extraordinary conditions that we are living in, which has reduced due to the lockdown and all, the trade and life as it was earlier has reduced. But I think I agree with you also that if you look in terms of investments, India's investments in Africa, first I think people should understand that in India the investments are not just at the government level. Private sector plays an important part. And private sector has its own vision about where to invest and when to invest. But I'm sure for the private sector, Africa is still a land of big opportunity. This is quite visible from the fact that in the last decade or so, Africa has become a land of opportunity for people across the world. And that is possible because of the steps that the African countries have taken in terms of enhancing their own condition, whether it is the economic development or the several steps that you have taken in terms of enhancing infrastructure. You say that infrastructure is development is a gap, but there are a lot of plans that the African countries have made in terms of resolving these problems, and that is what has made Africa an important area to invest in. But infrastructure again is an important area where India can invest in Africa, in Nigeria in particular. Health sector again, a number of visitors to India are basically in terms of health, because of the high cost of getting treatment on specialty treatment on diseases which are for which the treatment is pretty expensive in African countries. A lot of tourism in India is medical tourism. So one way of dealing with this would be enhancing the health sector in the African countries, joining hands with the African countries in building their hospitals, super specialty hospitals or other healthcare areas which the African countries are, needing our support in. So I think it should be a focus, a partnership which looks into both the African needs and also the Indian technical, so whether the Indian has a technical wherewithal to deal with these issues. I think these are the two things that we have to. I would like to make another comment here. Many people are well integrated in Africa. They do not consider themselves as Indians. They consider themselves as say Nigerians or South Africans or Namibians or Kenyans now. They're well integrated in the culture and in the society and have contributed to a large extent in building the economy of the countries where they are living. They are another bridge that India has in its relationships with countries in Africa. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Thank you, ma'am, for highlighting. I would like to thank Michael and Ruchita, ma'am, to take up the question and highlighting very important points along with the recent one about the Indian diaspora. So, Abhishek, would you like to answer to the main question? Do you have any points to make, or yeah, over to you?
No, yeah. So the whole thing is that, like, see, due to coronavirus, it has all obviously put up a resource constraint, capacity constraint, and all. So in the short term, there won't be that many projects. We are still continuing through our exam bank. We are still continuing our projects, but in the short term, of course, it has brought it to the halt to some extent. That is true not just in terms of for India, true for China as well. For China, even more so, like the future of BRI. I mean, I don't know, like, I mean, Chinese workers are also now facing racism and all, like, because of whatever their role, perceived role. So it's not going to be easy for any countries. Full on FDI investments in, it's not going to be the only answer when it comes to, as Michael correctly and very rightly pointed out, African countries from an aid dependent to they don't want to be an aid receiver, and they have, like, we always tend to forget that, like, Africa only receive. They already have, various innovative platforms and initiatives like Program for Infrastructure Development, PIDA, African Union, African Development Bank Group, and all. They have been doing tremendous work. So they don't. In the short term, it's just that how India will differentiate its approach is through lines of credit. It has worked. FDI also, as Ruchita ma'am pointed out, it's not just government or public sector investing, it's the private sector. It's actually driven by private sector. All of India's investments in Africa is driven by private sector, be it energy or telecom or etc. All these sectors, agriculture and all. So, like, lines of credit, of course, has worked through. We need to look at more innovative, unique financing mechanisms like Exim Bank's buyer credit facility or PPP model, more PPP model. In the short term, of course, uh, only FDI investments in Africa is not going to be the answer. But FDI is a crucial component. So, and India has already, as mentioned, $54 billion investment, which is not a small number. So yes, we will be working on it. And in terms of just small point, in terms of hospitals and all as well, actually Apollo, Fortis hospitals and all, they already have many on-ground tertiary hospital presence in countries like Nigeria, Democratic Republic of Congo, Tanzania, and all. Even I think Dr. Agarwal's eye clinic hospitals are also there across 6 to 8 or 9 countries, African countries. We actually have a India Africa Development Fund, as well as a $10 million India Africa Health Fund. So all these health funds and all can be mobilized to set up more tertiary hospitals and all across other African cities. In terms of health as well, we provide them Bhavatron, all these cancer detection that has we also organize artificial and all Jaipur food program and all across Jaipur food campaign, Kenya and all. So all the Malawi and all, Egypt, Tanzania, they are all beneficiaries. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Abhishek. Satyajit, any questions or comments from your end?
Yes, Mr. Vasu. So my question is regarding the traditional side of diplomacy, as in we have noticed since past 5 years that India has sought to establish more missions and embassies in different African countries. That is the role of Minister of External Affairs comes in here. Now, considering the fact that MEA is, short of staff or understaffed, so what role does this play in India-Africa ties? And is it a major? Does it have a major impact? And yeah, basically, how do we overcome this challenge apart from the private? This is directed to either Abhishek sir or Ruchita ma'am. Thank you.
Ma'am, should I take it or you please go ahead? Okay. So the India definitely has one of the least diplomatic corps around the world. So it only has, I think, around 1,000 foreign service officers. So the short answer to your question is basically more lateral entry into MEA. There needs to be more lateral entries into the MEA. Now I think India has around 39 resident missions in African countries, 39, and our target is to increase it by next year, 2021, to 47. So of course, this lack of IFS officers and all, it provides a lot of, like, challenges. I mean, how it needs to be overcome, I think they need to like have much more, many more lateral entries into the game. That's it.
Yeah, I agree with you, Satyadeep, when you say that this is a challenge in terms fact that our diplomatic corps is very small. But I think the government is looking into it, not just lateral entry. I think there are several other services, and government services in our missions abroad. They have created posts, as you are aware, that there are commercial engagement with the African countries to contribute. So I think we need not just diplomats, we also need people who have knowledge about the economic matters and all. So in that sphere, the bureaucrats who have been dealing with these issues also become an important asset. And if they are posted in Africa, then they would be able to enhance India's economic and development partnerships with the African countries in a big way. So it is a challenge, but India is a country with huge human resources. I think I'm sure we will be able to uh, find the ways and means in dealing with it. The enhancement of our diplomatic representation in Africa, like we're going to add 18 missions in Africa. This is something a demand which has come from the African side. That that India is not really engaging with Africa in a manner that that should be. So I think that's the reason why there has been an enhancement in India's diplomatic mission or India's frequent high level visits to Africa. Because for a very long time there was no high level visit to Africa at all. I mean, if you notice in the last 5 years, the visits that have happened at the Prime Minister President level, in some of the countries they have visited after there have been no high level visits for 25 or 30 years. So,
Question, this is in terms of the development model, because considering the fact that many African countries or LDCs specifically within Africa have recently seen eras of stability and peace. Now they see either Chinese model of development or Indian model of development or a synthesis of both, and there are diverse opinions regarding this. So what what would India, or what is the role of India in terms of capitalizing on this to further bolster the ties with African countries to convince that India has been a model and or is a better model when compared to the other states.
Was it directed to speak or it is open? The question.
It is open.
Satya.
It is open.
Okay.
It is open.
Yeah. See, the Indian model in Africa or whatever, I think we do a lot. Okay, like we have been doing a lot for the last 70 years, but the problem arises is that we don't advertise, we don't publicly advertise what we are doing. There are no zero media correspondents, African media correspondents in India. I'm not sure how many Indian media correspondents are there in Africa, but probably zero, which is very, I mean, that is unacceptable, really. So this is exactly what China does well. Any small thing which they do, they like publicize it. Look at how we use the term wolf warrior diplomacy or whatever. But like all of their, like all of their diplomats and all have accounts. Their embassies are active on social media. They're engaging with the civil societies in Africa, in every African country. Whereas India, like while we do so many good work, while we have so many projects on the ground, but still like local Africans, most of the time they don't even get a hinge of it, like get a wind of what India is doing or what has been India's development cooperation in Africa. So these are the things which needs these are the form of small things which India needs to drastically improve upon if we have to like improve our ties with African countries. All the mechanisms and everything is in place. It just needs to be rejigged, and there needs to be just a little bit nudge. We need to like, think a little bit more creatively, like increase more African presence on social media. Our diplomats are like, if I may use the term, they are very gentlemanly and all. So they don't, they don't propagate or they don't talk about what India has been doing. I mean, very few of them participates in local kind of interactions and all. They have been doing. It's not that they don't. There are many Bharatwala associations in many African countries. In those kind of way, we do engage with civil society organizations, but a lot more needs to be done, which China does it better than us, unfortunately. That's it.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think my comment is that I don't think it's the question of whether it should be an Indian model or the Chinese model that should be followed in terms of engagement with African countries. I mean, the model should be something which would benefit the Africans. I think that should be the model. India has been suggesting, or the Indian path in India's engagement with Africa has been in terms of the principles of South-South cooperation, where we look at country charting charting. The Africa sit down and engaging with each other in a big way in the post-COVID period and look at each other's priorities and enhance our engagement. But I think India has been doing well. The only thing that is needed more is that there should be more people within India who should be interested in what's happening in Africa. I think there are fewer number of experts working on Africa within India or tracking Africa. If we are engaging with the African countries more, there should be more people in India who are interested or who are aware of what is India doing in Africa. So for that, I think the engagement should begin at a very young age. I think from school to college level in our education system, Africa should be part of our curriculum. Until and unless we do that, I think the engagement will not go anywhere because we it it should be at three levels. It should be at the level of government, should be at the level of business. It should also be at the level of civil society. We are a huge society and a diverse society. I think we need to engage more at the civil society level. There should be more people uh, studying African issues. Until and unless we study, how will we be able to welcome Africans in India and understand the problems that they are facing within our own society? So I think it's equally important if we are looking at a development partnership, we should also enhance the people-to-people partnership with the African countries. Right.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Maybe I should just add to what the scholar just said. Am I permitted to go ahead?
Yeah, sure, Michael. Please go ahead.
All all right. I'm just trying to relate Africa. Let me say the states in Africa now to states in Asia, and citing the example of Singapore, citing the example of Malaysia now. These are countries that have succeeded in developing models that are working for them to foster their own development. So what I'm saying in essence is that for actually adopting certain model for Africa to follow, or maybe other nations to follow, may not be totally be correct. Going by what the last speaker said, the best thing is just to develop indigenous approach that is a 21st century backed up in I mean, coming up with mechanisms, with models that can help hasten the growth and development in Africa, whether politically, whether economically, whether technologically, just talk of any other sector. So if we can do this, if it is people centered or people owned, it will be a way of it should bring about collective ownership for everybody, Africans, to actually champion the cause for better change. When we today we still blame in Africa, we still blame our colonial masters for some of the challenges we are facing, which is actually not true. They only came, gave us their own model. We adopted it, inclusive of education. So we are still using the British curriculum in teaching in African, most African states today. For the Anglophone part of Africa, I'm talking of the countries colonized by France now. They are still using the French curriculum in teaching at the basic level, the upper basic level or at the tertiary level. So what I'm submitting as an African today, as a young person passionate about Africa's development, is that the only way forward is just for Africa to look inward. Let us develop indigenous model.
To highlight key takeaways of a roundtable discussion and what could be the way forward. So, key takeaways, according to me, are even so defined pillars of model of cooperation, like we have discussed: medical diplomacy, maritime diplomacy, the 10 guiding principles. These are already defined. We have yet to have a consolidated policy, but these are some defined pillars which we have been working on, which India and Africa have been cooperating on, and we can further escalate the cooperation to a much more strategic level, which is already there, but which can be further escalated. Second is, yes, COVID-19 has been a big jolt to the global order, to trade and all. We all have been facing effects of pandemic, and we hope that the cooperation between India and Africa leads to a fruitful outcome in the post-COVID era, and help each other to come out of adversaries of pandemic. Key takeaways which can be the way forward, which I have identified through the roundtable discussion, is that first of all, we need more experts and more strategic experts in the field of India and Africa relations, not only from India but from other side as well. As Ruchita ma'am had stated, that at government level, at individual level, at civil society level, but also from school to college, we need to have that aspect of study. We need to include importance of Africa since our school levels. Second, which important aspect or way forward which was discussed is more people to people forums, because as we know, as it was highlighted, that Indian diaspora is quite strong in Africa, and to even enhance business opportunities, to enhance trade or everything, we need more and more people to people forums. It has been there, but it can be much escalated. And since because of COVID era, most of meetings or summits are being conducted virtually, it can be an opportunity now to virtually connect. To connect virtually, it would be much more easier for ventures in India and Africa to connect. Third thing is, yes, India needs to expand its diplomatic machinery and the foreign service machinery. It has been doing quite well, but if it is expanded, then yes, we can do wonders. But till now, we can say that 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 even that small machinery has maintained and sustained the quality of India's diplomacy. The last thing which I would like to point out is, as Michael had also, yeah, before that, one important thing which I would like to point out is the space cooperation. In August, we had India and Nigeria signing an agreement on research on space missions, and this could be an important avenue of cooperation as well. So coming to the last part, yes, as Michael had pointed out, that Africa is blessed to have a neighbor like India. I would just like to add that even India is blessed to have Africa as our neighbor. And if we see what are the challenges between this cooperation, the first one, uh, which was that the cumbersome bureaucratic procedures for private companies across in both the areas, from Africa to India, from India to Africa, the cumbersome bureaucratic process, which sometimes makes investment a bit uneasy for private companies. We need and and India would be as we have a policy of neighborhood first. India is surely working on and in post-COVID and is also currently would surely work to provide a few opportunities. So with this, I would request speakers to, if they have any concluding remarks to roundtable discussion before ending.
Yeah, thank you. I only want to appreciate the platform again for inviting me to share my thoughts. I'm so passionate about Africa. And just on a lighter note, let me say this that since 2018, I've been writing a book on Africa just to, should I say, awaken the consciousness of both the leaders and the led in Africa to actually see the need to bring about the Africa of our dreams. So at the appointed time, the book is titled "If Africa Will Ever Rise." So it's more like a conditional statement. So I will share the blue book on the platform. Perhaps if my brothers in India would love to actually have a copy of it, because some of these things we are discussing about, there are things that are actually pointed out in the book. So it's actually a good one, and I look forward to further engagement discussing about the relationship between India and Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Uh,
Yes. Yes. First of all, thank you, Vasu, and thank you to the team of Internationalism for inviting, for coordinating this engaging talk. Ruchita ma'am, it was wonderful to see you again, meet you again. And I have made a new friend from Nigeria, Michael. Congrats on your book. I'll be reaching out to you. Thank you for all your impassioned points and all. And once again, thank you to all the organizers.
Thank you.
Ma'am, your concluding.
Thanks a lot, Basu and Internationalism, for inviting me for this talk. I'm truly delighted by our discussions. I think I've learned a lot today. It has been a very engaging talk. Michael, you've become a new friend from across Africa, my friend from Nigeria. I'm sure we'll keep in touch in future. And Abhishek, we need to meet more frequently, I think. But I think my key takeaway is that India should continue with its Africa First policy. I think that we have neighborhood first. I think given the high priority we have for Africa, should be Africa First, but at all levels, at the government, at the private sector, at the academic, and the people to even, and Africa First. Thank you.
So, Mr. Moderator, can we just put on our camera to snap, all of us? Is it possible?
Sorry, Michael, I didn't get you.
I say, is it possible for all of us to put on our camera so that we just snap?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Satyajit and Pratik, could you switch on your camera?
Yeah, give me a minute.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm coming online.
Pratik?
Yeah, I'm trying.